When it comes to documentation of history as relates to people's lives, the documentarians usually want to feel as if they have some information about the person from their youth. They want to be able to chronicle through a timeline everything that they believe that they know about somebody's life to give them the conclusion to be able to draw at the end of whatever it is the story discloses that they have written. When it comes to framing people, people don't understand that you can set somebody's life up for them to be framed at specific times in history. You can literally chart it out, what the traumas are going to be at specific points in specific people's lives, so that specific events will take place or appear to have taken place at specific times in history. What happened in my situation was that I was broken away from my home. So everything that they had pre-coordinated was kind of disrupted by way of unforeseen circumstances that happened to be bad. And because I was a resilient young person and survived all of that change when most kids would have been broken, I didn't realize what it took to do what I did, because I was so busy trying to survive and be strong that I had no idea that I had accomplished and achieved things even as a child that most adults can't even handle. What they did was started collecting a discovery file for the district attorney's office and for the police department evidence room from the time I was a little child, so that they could make a story look how they wanted it to look versus what actually happened. Now I'm starting to understand where all of the things that were stolen from me went. I would come back to class and somebody took my notebook and nobody else's. Somebody took my drawings and my artwork but nobody else's. Somebody took my clothes but nobody else's. And I wonder who keeps doing that. And it transpired multiple times, even when I would go to different schools. I switched grade schools almost 15 times. Still graduated from high school and graduated from college. Only one in millions of people of any race achieve something like that. But I can remember vividly my shoes being taken, things like my mouth guards from my uniform, personal things from my sportswear, wristbands, headbands, and I wonder who would want that? Who would take that is what I wonder. And it took me some time to realize what had been happening. They have been tracking me. They have been following me. They have been studying me and examining me as an involuntary research and psychiatric study for race relations. Because there are only really a few people in the whole world with the kind of history that I have. And with the kind of familial background I have, where my elders were already in the criminal penal system. They had criminalized our whole family based upon what people did before I was even born. And it didn't have anything to do with me. And not only that, we had this extensive, incredible history that could have been validated with something positive, but my family seemed to have some type of hereditary, genetic predisposal to wanting to behave badly. But they were unlike my grandparents and the people who produced them. My grandparents were not these kinds of people. And so when my grandparents passed in the 80s, that's when everybody was wide open to show who they really were, and they didn't have anybody to answer to, and I learned more about what my family was. So in present day, some events have transpired that I'm going to share with you here to show you how somebody can take something that is alleged to have taken place in somebody's youth and try to make a correlation and connection to say that there's been behaviors that somebody has exhibited since they were young. Well, nobody really knew anything about me like that because I was private, I stayed to myself, and I didn't really get into these little groupings that people get into. They were trying to steal my personal information and my documentation and then make it look like they wanted it to look. Anything that anybody has about my life or my personal effects that they don't have, that they can show that I signed or that I gave them permission in some kind of way, is illegally obtained and stolen. I remember exactly what I did and how I did it the whole time. Nobody was even interested in me as a creative. I didn't even know I was going to end up doing art. Because people down here in this part of the country did not value art in that kind of way. They didn't value black entertainment or the black contribution to the entertainment system at large in that kind of way. This was a blue-collar mill working town, and everybody either worked at the mill, or they went to the jail. If you didn't end up working in the mill or going to jail, a lot of times they found themselves in low-paying service positions. That was the way it was. I was one of the only people that made it out of Columbus, Georgia, without anybody here being able to say that they had a connection to be able to say they helped me achieve something. Just about every person that has achieved from here has some type of tether on them where somebody else essentially kind of owns them or represents them as a middleman. Well, I went out and achieved on my own, something that one in millions of people do. So there have been a series of events that have transpired since I've returned here. And I started to make the correlation. They're trying to make it look like a pattern so that they can say this is something that we know about this person from their past. Well, how would they know anything about my past if they spent no time around me, if they don't know anything about me, we've never had a relationship, they've never talked to me? How would they know something about my past in the first place if they were not violating me? Or if they were not going to somebody else to get it? And what reason would they have to want to know something about me if I haven't done anything wrong? What were they trying to document? What would be the objective of investment? What would make a whole community select and target somebody and try to steal their life? Because they know what the profit margin can be for specific kinds of lives. They know what the profit margin can be when they use public examples to illustrate something else that they want to sell. So I just want to give you some illustrations of some things that took place the last couple of days and show you an unknown appearance and depiction of what could seem like a pattern from long ago that would be something that these shysters, these criminals, tried to come together to collaborate on to make a depiction and submit it as something that was supposed to be real evidence, real testimony, and what have you. What ended up happening in my life was that I had knowledge of a lot of things that went on that I never discussed, that I never told anybody. I didn't really start talking about anything until I was about 32 years old. And it was only because I had to. I was not raised to be running my mouth about everything that I know, no matter what it was, so I stayed silent. And so what has happened now is I've caught this community in a scandal. And the people who have been misled into adversely affecting me, the people that made up that lie, know that everything about what they have done in their life and career is going to be called into question because of the guy who was going to let everybody that was misled know what the real truth is. If they had known the truth from the start, some of these people would have never done the things that they did. But there is a demographic of people here who enjoys the predation of subjecting people to things that hurt them. They like to see people suffer here. They like to see people die. They like to see people in pain. They like to see people starving and hurting. And that is part of why it was voted one of the most miserable cities of its size in the country in 2014. I'm not making anything up. I'm not embellishing anything, and I'm also not going to cover up anything or hold anything back about these facts. Now, they say that because I won't let them exploit me and harm me, that, well, we don't like you. Well, so be it, because I never came back here for anybody to like me. I never asked for anybody to like me except the people who mean something to society. Why is everybody so consumed with trying to make people who don't even mean anything anyway like them? Who cares if somebody that doesn't mean anything and has no purpose likes you or not? How about you focus on the people that do have meaning, that do have purpose, that do get what's going on, that do something for their world? I come from a culture and a race of people that are more invested in misconduct and bad behavior than any race in the country. They would respect and value me more if I committed crime and put my own freedom and my racial identity and everything about my family and my future that I would want to be portrayed differently in a bad light? What is it with black culture that makes it cool to do things nobody is supposed to do? What is it with white culture that decides that the bad things that they do are a different kind of bad than the black person doing something that's allegedly bad? Something's just kind of wrong. And so what I did was I followed faith, I followed my own chosen path, and now I'm showing people who I really am on my own. I don't need a representative. I know how to speak for myself. I know how to show the facts for myself. I don't have anything to hide. I haven't lived a bad life. I don't have anything to be guilted by, shamed by, embarrassed by, because I know what I did, and I can show what I did, and I can show what happened to prevent me from being able to continue. And it didn't have anything to do with me. I was not going to be society's victim. You take what you have and you do the best you can. So let me show you this little illustration of something that transpired over the last couple of days. And then I'll let you make the correlation and how a law enforcement system can take something that they did to set somebody up for a frame in their youth that failed, that they held on to for all of that time throughout your life, and try to make it seem like a pattern. There was something that happened when I was in high school that looks exactly like what I drove past the last couple of days. And all it takes is one claim that something took place a long time ago, and people will start making up all kinds of things. Everybody that ends up getting framed or in some type of crime scandal, you're going to notice that it always starts off with something that they portray as this so-called neighborhood or business vandalism. So that they have a reason to say, well, this is why we're sending all of these police officers into the area to protect public safety, because they will have no other reason to be coming into that area doing what they're doing. But when you see officers that are specifically speeding upon you as an individual when you come into the area, and there would be no way possible to know exactly when you would be in that area, somebody is either stalking you and telling them, or somebody is calling and informing them. Now, if you know for certain a person is absolutely not involved in something, what reason would you have to go harass them and racially profile anyway, just because somebody claims to have called and seen a suspicious person in the area? So you have a right to go deprive somebody of their liberty, of their freedom to move about, just because somebody claimed they saw somebody that was suspicious? So if that's the case, we should be able to call and say, well, we see a suspicious law enforcement officer. Can you send somebody out and check on that officer? I mean, come on, it just doesn't make sense. So what are we going to do about the overt racism? Now, I'm not going to get into all these racial issues with people here, because that's just a distraction. I have one of the biggest potentials for influence, regardless of race, of anybody in this country. That's what they're trying to stop. They're trying to stop this voice from being heard. They're trying to stop what I have achieved from being seen and known. Because once people hear this, once people see this, they know something's going to change. And they know that the investment that they made for years, expecting to get a return off of it, is not only going to fail and end up with nothing, somebody's going to get in trouble for this. And that's what this has been all about. That's why I've been so steadfast and determined. I've got a mass of people that I've done nothing to, that I want nothing from, ask for nothing for, or from, who invested in trying to create a public downfall that they could use to sell involuntarily. And guess what, people? It's not just white people. Black people were doing the same thing. I just happened to be the first person that exposed it. I have given no biographers, genealogists, archivists, historians, or any kind of other documentarians permission, librarians, to write anything about me. How would they obtain it if I've never given anything to anybody? If I've never shown anybody anything? If I've never told them they could? What are they writing about? Why would they be trying to write about somebody they don't really know in the first place? Because it was a community invested conspiracy to exploit human life, and I caught them. And I want this to be an example for every person in every family in this country and throughout the world of absolute willful exploitation by people who are standing in their face or standing in the public telling an absolute lie about what they were involved in. There's no way possible what I experienced could be possible without somebody having something going on, without some motivation. They call it conspiracy when a bunch of people come together to do something insidious and then cover it up. But what it really is collective, community organized crime. It's theft. If you steal property, intellectual property, artwork, writing, or something of cultural value that you intend to write about or portray, even if they say it's for non-profit, you can make more off a non-profit than you can off a for-profit. It takes money to do all of it. But without the person who created it, without the life that they exploit, they can't do anything. They have nothing to sell. They have nothing to write about. And so I decided I'm not letting them do that to me. You can hear police officers being quoted that they can take your liberty, take your life. What in the oath says that somebody can be so arrogant in entitlement for a public service position they have been given that's funded by taxpayers that makes them think that you can threaten the citizens who provide your profession for you with death and theft of their liberty and their personal property? That lets you see what's really going on in Columbus. For somebody to even be willing to go there in public. I look at a man every day for the last couple of weeks who got away with murder, who used to be a law enforcement officer here. He got away with flat out murder for the things that he covered for other people. Now what happens when what he has sown becomes something that he reaps? Somebody at some point is going to want to make even with that man for what he got away with, because he didn't have to do it the way he did it. Now, I don't want to do anything that's going to open any old wounds or bring up a part of the past that we don't need to visit. But an innocent fireman was murdered. And he went on with his life like, okay, well, I shot somebody. I was just doing my job. We can't get to a point where something like that is acceptable. And I won't be surprised if at some point somebody sues that man or that man ends up having that case reopened. And it was insulated and hidden in this community. And when I see people that have already gotten away with crime who know how to get away with crime, and they start showing up in places regularly where you go, you know that that means that they might be able to pull off something else again. There have been some people who have done what they did more than once. And so somebody, just like me, had to step forward with the proper information to inform the public about what we need to know. Because nobody's supposed to be walking around feeling like they're endangered by public service people. And so what ends up happening is if nobody documents it and nobody shares it with the people who need to know this, hear this, and see this, people continue to engage in misconduct and it deteriorates the value of society. I'm not afraid of any of these people. And that's been the problem, this culture of intimidation. I don't use any drugs. I don't have anything going on whatsoever. I never have. But they were going to try to make it look like something else happened that never did. And if you don't have an education, there's no way you can know what I know. So when people are wondering whether or not you need to get an education, whether it's valuable or not, whether it's worth it or not, the things I've experienced can happen to anybody. And it can happen more so when you're predisposed because you're black and you come from a low income situation. You need your education. And hopefully after you get your education, you will receive some adequate professional training so you know how to do what you're supposed to do in ways that do not harm the people that you are supposed to serve and represent, or the product or the service or whatever it is that you do. You want to be able to properly represent that without causing harm. A lot of people are going to wonder what was this really all about? Like, why would all of this be going on? Why would this investment, why would this stuff that I've described be taking place? What is it really all about? It's about trying to control economics. It's about trying to control a person's livelihood so that they have control of their identity, and that a person cannot have their own freedom without somebody else's permission. It's about the things that took place during slavery and segregation, where people wanted to be able to say, if we can't control you, then we want to harm you. It's like some people have been treated like the 21st century version of the runaway slave. They want to have these people that they claim are running from something that they own so that they can have freedom. See, that's what it's been about the whole time. Who gets freedom? Because the people with the freedom can create their own future. When you have your own economics, you can create your own self-reliance. You can create your own venues. You can invite your own people. But when they take away your resources and you have been economically deprived and they force you into hardship so that you are destitute, so that there's deprivation, now you end up desperate to survive. And anybody that doesn't have stable economics, anybody that's unemployed, anybody that has self-reliance can get accused of anything. And so what is it really about? Absolute greed and economic deprivation. And you'll find out that many, many levels participate in things like this that pretend as if that's not what they're doing and that's what it's all about. I was simply doing what it took to validate and assume control and possession of my own self-identity. I know who I am. I know where I came from. I don't have to have somebody else's permission to be who I am. I don't need somebody to speak for me. I don't need somebody showing up telling me where I should or should not be. I invested in my life in education so that I can make that responsible decision on my own. And they don't want other people of color, apparently, to know that they could do the same thing. So they go after the best, the brightest, and the strongest. But more than anything, it had to do with the fact that I came from a very bad family who hasn't achieved much and who hasn't really contributed anything to society that's meaningful. And anytime you come from a bad family that doesn't do anything to show themselves as productive citizens, it's hard to sell that as something that's valuable to the country. You can't look all American when you come from the worst kinds of behaviors that are immoral, that society doesn't accept. And so I ended up on that boundary where I can do more than anybody else of any race from wherever they come from. But my background, when people have to tell people about who I am and where I come from, is so ugly that it embarrasses the country. It embarrasses the state. It embarrasses the community. And so they tangled me up into something that didn't have anything to do with me. And I'm telling people now that you don't have to accept that, because now it's not just black people that are going through those circumstances. It's not just people that are poor, because there are wealthy people who end up in lower socioeconomic statuses now. What I'm saying is you don't have to let anybody take advantage of your life. You don't have to let anybody make you their social whore and control your life like that. You've got to do what it takes to find out what your God-given gifts are, get you some professional training and education, and then find the people who know what it is you're trying to do. I found a whole country, it seemed like, wasn't trying to give me an opportunity because they invest in certain people. Your state, your city is not the only one that invests in its people. There can be people on the other side of the country that are already invested in somebody's life from the East Coast, or vice versa. There can be people in the North who are already invested in somebody's life. They can put state expenditures into an investment into a life. They can use one story to sell something to the whole nation, to sell a message, to sell a directive, a political motivation. They can use one person to do that. As you can see illustrated in the past through people like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Jack Johnson, if you're talking about black people, but numerous other people that didn't happen to be black. I'm just talking about those males that managed to garner public attention at a level that few black people ever do. And they milked those people's lives and legacies for decades, to the point where history became fatigued of even hearing about them. Nobody has been exploited economically more than the image of Jesus Christ and Martin Luther King in the history of the world. Think about that. You still have people paying themselves right now for a person that lived all those years ago. So it's not beyond belief in the scope of reason. Some people come here naturally gifted in ways that you don't have to train. And when they become educated, they become even better. And I ended up being one of those people. And they said that people that come from what I came from would not be able to do that. And I made liars out of them without trying to compete with them, without knowing they were trying to oppress me. So the moment that I get the opportunities economically that were deprived, then I can show, and not only that, share the gifts that have been bestowed upon me and what that can do for all of us. You've been lied to. They've misled you. They tricked you. And if you want to condemn somebody spiritually, publicly, go after the people that attempted to frame and harm the innocent, using gender exploitation, racism, or whatever their motivation was or is, religion, whatever it is. Go after them, because I'm not the one following anybody around. I'm not the one showing up making trouble. I'm not the one saying bad things about people. I'm living my life and doing my thing, and I'm going to continue. Thanks again.